All right, once again, hello everyone. Welcome to our first session. This is Feedback Strategies, 5 practices to increase student success and decrease instructor workload. Our presenter today is Dr. Patrick Dempsey. He is a director of the Office of Digital Teaching and Learning at Loyola University, Maryland. Dr. Dempsey, you have the floor.
Hey, thanks so much. Appreciate the intro. Appreciate so many of you coming to this session, taking time out of your day and taking time out to specifically be here. I'm going to share my screen, highly interactive presentation that I cannot do without you all in the chat at all times. So I'm going to get right to it. So let's just do it. Let's just start it out. So here's the question, starting it out. Warm us up, get some typing fingers going here. What's the purpose of a course? Question number 1. And after you get that, I'll ask that second one, which you can see. So explain the purpose of a course. There's no time to wait here. Learn, grow, facilitate, credentials. Someone's actually saying the outcome. I like that, actually doing something with it. Guide students through learning experience. State learning objectives, good. Develop skills. Okay, so with that, with all those different things, part of the curriculum, good. What's the purpose of an instructor in a course? So we got facilitate, coach, going for metaphors here. Assess, guide, direct. Design and deliver, cheerleader. Metaphors, metaphors. Think about all those metaphors. Great book, Metaphors We Teach by. I forget who it was by, but it was a good book. Keep their job for sure. I'm only here to get paid. Shepherd, ooh, quite a metaphor there. Even pulling out the staff once in a while. So I want to commend something similar to that. Really, the purpose is to help students get good at the course, which we often don't think about. Our course is something that students actually have to navigate and be experts at. And then, of course, help them get good at whatever the course is about. And I think most of us said that, to learn the concepts so that they're proficient in what we're teaching them. So here's a question. How does anyone get good at anything? And this is a chat question. Every time you see that color, it's a question for you. Practice, feedback loops, practice, 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 feedback, repetition, practice, practice. 10,000 hours, someone read Malcolm Gladwell there. Demonstration, making mistakes. Failing. Practice, repetition, good. Thank you for all your participation. We're gonna keep this going. Oh, tied to positive emotion. So internalize, good. So those are different things than practicing for sure. So here's a quote: the belief that a sufficient amount of experience or practice leads to maximal effort appears incorrect. A sufficient amount of practice is apparently not enough to help anyone get good at anything, but it is possible to get good at something, to improve performance by seeking out practice activities that help individuals grow in specific aspects of a task. And they do that with these things in the lower right that I have to move my screen for. With the help of a teacher in a protective environment with opportunities for reflection, exploration of alternatives, problem solving, repetition, and feedback. Yes, the way you practice definitely affects performance. So like if this is what you got out of this, like this is the role of the instructor, this is the role as us as instructional designers, is doing these sorts of things on the lower right here, like this is what we should be trying to do in course design. This is a great takeaway. But let's get to our content. So what are the elements that are necessary for a student to be successful in a course? Let's put those in the chat. Let's start putting those in the chat. Clear expectations, room to fail, measure outcomes, good. Good design, ease of use, excellent. It's a QM crowd, obviously. Communication. We definitely don't want to overlook these, but the ones that you're adding are excellent. So we know these are them, and these are not going to happen, right, without clear expectations. without clear instructions, without clear parameters. So this is the goal, right? This is what we're getting at as teachers, to be able to do all those things that you all just wrote in the chat, and with the background or the foundation of these things that are circled here on the right. We're the help of the teacher, that's who we are. Opportunities for reflection, there's an environment, I would say that's good instruction, good design, developing trust, I'd say that's that environment. So all of these things. So the challenge is, like, how do we do this? How do we do all of these things and also provide feedback opportunities for students? Because this is like the guts of what we do. And we also, like, practically, once the course starts, hopefully we've embedded all these. How do we provide that feedback? So that's what we're going to get at. This is just a little bit of background about the challenge of actually giving feedback, is we have to be proficient at all those things. And then, by the way, give feedback. So first I want to explain the characteristics. Well, we're going to explain the characteristics of high quality feedback, and then the 5 strategies: evaluating the types of feedback, identifying pain points, incorporating feed forward, creating a strategy, and then sharing that feedback plan. So those are the 5 strategies. To get there, we're going to start with explaining the characteristics of high quality feedback. So what's the biggest obstacle to giving feedback? Thank you, everyone. Jillian, Caitlin. Will students read it? That is also, it's not really a challenge to giving it, but yeah. So time is definitely it. There were no other slides. This is just, it's just time consuming. I was hoping you would all say time. If you didn't, this would have been a terrible disaster and I would have had to start over. So thankfully everyone cooperated. So I like to think of feedback in these 4 different ways. And we only have, we're people, we have a certain amount of time, we have capacity. And so where we're spending our time in this feedback is really going to dictate our ability to give feedback. And this is what's going to help us drive at what are the characteristics of high quality feedback. So logistical and content. So logistical feedback, 2 levels: instructional and expectational. Logistical feedback. This assignment was due on Sunday. It was supposed to be 3 pages long. That takes us time to write. And if we're writing it to 20 people or 30 people or 50 people, that takes a lot of time to write. So another type of logistical feedback that we might give is expectations. When I use the word synthesis, I actually meant that you should include opposing perspectives. So we're sort of clarifying what we meant by certain terms. We often end up giving a ton of feedback in that expectations aspect of student performance. Getting a little bit closer to where we want to be, we get content feedback, and content feedback that's generalized. We start connecting what someone did to the content of the course. And an example here, it would be interesting to see you connect this, make a connection between this and that. So we're obviously reading the student's assignment, we're thinking about how it relates to the content, but it's still a little bit generalized. And then finally, individualized feedback. And this is where we actually have created enough clarity, like we talked about. Our expectations are clear, so students aren't stumbling. We've been super clear about how we expect students to connect concepts, and now we're just looking at someone's individual work. So I think the goal of what we want to do with feedback, and potentially the most time-consuming aspect of feedback, is this individualized feedback. I think as instructors, this is where we thrive, where we have the opportunity to share our expertise in unique ways to unique students. So based on this short discussion in the chat, why don't we start throwing out some characteristics of high quality feedback? I don't have another slide that's going to explain it. This is all going to be us taking what we know and what we've learned to this point to, yes, so specific, actionable, I love that. Constructive, encouraging for sure. Actionable, I think, has come up several times, and I love that. Telling people what they could actually do.
Stay warm today. All righty. Is it warm?
Thank you for getting that mute. Transformational. What is, and if you can expand on transformational. So the good and the poor, the old hamburger method. Hey, here's what you did good. Here's what you could improve on. And here's maybe what I'd like to see. Excellent. So it's really specific. It's actionable. It's encouraging. It's formative. Excellent. Love that word. Great. Yeah, we're not just looking back, right? That's that list. Instructional expectations, like you should have done this. That's the past. Transformational is they're going to do something different in the future. Love that. So that's the characteristics of high quality feedback. Yeah, Karen, pushing them forward, sure. So to start doing that, right? To start doing this, hi, Paula. Oh, Paula. Paula's such a great fan. I see her at so many sessions. She's always so supportive, and I love seeing her at QM. So strategy one, evaluate the types of feedback you are giving. So this is like totally simple, but potentially transformational, to use that word that came up, is doing something like this. If you're not an instructor, encouraging an instructor to do this for one assignment is to really start outlining, take one assignment and detail that maybe the percentage of time or the amount of time you're actually taking on giving these types of feedback. So the strategy that we can use to help students succeed and to limit our time is to actually evaluate the feedback we're giving. And see if we can move all the way to that individualized, and see if actually we're giving way too much individualized and it's just taking too much time, and maybe we need to come up with other strategies. So if you screenshot this, if you do something like this, I would just start with one assignment, and it can be really an effective way to, and a first step to making better use of your time and making better success for students as you give feedback. So that literally is strategy one. There's no more slides related to strategy one. So I want to make sure the slides will be available, but if you're screenshotting, do it now. So strategy two is identify student pain points. So we're coming back to this, like we've taken an assignment, we've looked at the assignment, we've sort of identified where we're giving the feedback. Now, what are the course elements that we're likely to find that are limiting our ability to provide that individualized feedback in the chat? So volume is huge. Yeah, lengthy papers for sure. And we're really thinking of course elements here. So I'll count students, but also unclear expectations would definitely be there. Actual content pages for sure. Instructions. Show the type of assignment that keeps coming up, the type of assignment we're giving. Technological limitations, that would be on your part, maybe the student's part. So I feel like I summarize all of these. Yeah, course organization, right? If the students actually don't know what to do. Clarity of instructions, specificity of expectations. And this can really come to the assignment type. And then technological limitations, like the misuse of tools. And so I want to talk about a couple things in terms of big picture and then really small picture that, and that small picture I think will apply to a lot of, especially these assignment types that we talked about, and how the challenge of large numbers can really limit our ability to give feedback. So there's something, obviously we're at QM, that I always love to share, this great quote. Student-centered standardization and consistency across the college offerings. That quote's related to this community college, I think it was in Arizona, that got denied accreditation because of the lack of student-centeredness and consistency across courses. And there's a huge reason why, even if you have a good course and someone comes from a bad course, sometimes students are sometimes confused and ask questions because they're waiting for you to pull the rug out from underneath them. So this consistency, this big picture, this course organization, this consistency across courses is probably the biggest hurdle that would keep you from giving individualized feedback at volume, because you're so busy dealing with cognitive load that students are carrying with them, unsure expectations that they're bringing in with them. So if there's one thing obviously that you could do, it would be organizing your course in a consistent way internally, and then mapping that across similar courses in your discipline. But on the lower level, this is a big example, so I want to talk through some of the elements here, is assignment instructions. And we talked about lack of clarity in instructions. And there's a couple things that I really want to highlight here, and especially when we're talking about large assignments that are large, is using these sort of organizational approaches to instructions. Just going to be one of the biggest ways that you can save time, because one of the biggest pain points is not only the student not understanding what to do, but you having to find where they did it in an assignment. This plays for a lot of assignments, and sometimes you have to think differently about traditional assignments that you're giving, but using headings, using action verbs as opposed to questions, I really think these examples that I give of questions are pretty funny. So like, what is your research question is a question, and then the right answer to that is actually the question that will guide my research. Which, you know, I would love an emoji for someone that actually appreciates those sort of geeky jokes, but it is true. So like when we use descriptive terms as opposed, and we use statements instead of questions, then we actually help students give the sort of information that we want them to, and they're not lost. And that helps us when I go, and this is just a discussion that I have used to grade this is super easy, even though I've got 30 students doing it. And maybe you're saying 30 isn't much, maybe you got 100 students doing it, because I know exactly what they're supposed to do, where they're supposed to do it, and I can see really quickly if they've done it. And so these sorts of techniques can be used in so many different places. Templatizing performance where it's appropriate, using headings, encouraging students to use headings, even if you're doing short answers, essays for a final or a midterm. Doing things like this, even just giving a template that they can fill out, will save you enormous amounts of time, and using more, again, statements as opposed to questions will really help. And again, if we go back, so there's going to be objection of like spoon feeding. There's going to be the objection of they need to learn these things. But if we go back to the beginning, and we saw it was the help of the teacher through repetition and a safe environment, and it was specific aspects, I don't expect my student to know what I mean by, you know, what is your research topic? I don't expect them to know to do all of these things. So as the teacher, I'm instructing them. If someone were to ask you this in this context of academia, what you would want to do is identify the topic. But that's not enough. What you really need to do is describe why it's an important research topic to explore, because there's a certain gap in the field. And by the way, if you're going to do this project, you need access to participants and you need an instrument. So these are the sorts of things that we can do to facilitate student learning and to reduce our load, because we know that they're either sort of doing these things or not. And I think one of the great benefits to this approach, to an approach like this, is that you can actually sort of do away with rubrics, because it's sort of like you did this or you didn't do it. And it makes grading super easy. Like, this is formative. This is you're doing these things or not doing these things. And then I really am able to get at that individual feedback for students. So I know there's a ton of information on the slide. The slides will be available. You can always email me if they weren't posted. But structuring your instructions like this, not just clarity, but super stupid clear will help your student and help you reduce time. So that was the second strategy, identify the pain points. And one of those common pain points is we saw as course structure, course organization within your course and others, but also almost more importantly, the pain point of the instructions themselves and the sorts of things we're asking students to do, and the way that we're going to predict how difficult it will be for us to assess whether they've done it. So a third strategy is incorporating feedforward. And this is one of my favorite topics to talk about. So feedback and feedforward. So the difference between feedforward and feedback: feedforward is before, feedback's after, fine. But let's look at this image, and based on this sort of, I think it's a metaphor, explain the purposes of negative feedback and positive feedback based on this image or your understanding. Julia, and I will, I always forget to post them, so I'll give them to the QM folks, but you can also email me individually and I'm happy to send them to you. So in the chat, explaining the purposes of negative and positive feedback based on this image or your understanding. Excellent. So positive is keeping learners on the right path, proactive, reducing errors, things not to do on the negative. Negative can hurt. I like that. A negative going off the cliff. I think that's like about as good as you can get. Yep. Negative corrects for sure. And a couple more on the positives. I know there were a couple. Stopping learners when there's a big problem. I love that. Yep. First attempt in learning. Yep, definitely. And the guardrail is meant to, as you're failing, not totally just kill yourself. Excellent. And positive can also keep them away from the cliff. Yeah. So here's a way to simplify it. Negative is corrective, it's controlling, and it helps to avoid failure. We talked about that. Positive is directive. So someone said that, keeps them going in that it's propelling them and it's amplifying success. So we're avoiding failure on the one hand, and we're amplifying success on the other hand. So really, feed forward comes in when we're doing both of these. And really reflecting back on those instructions, that was a ton of feed forward that is using negative feedback and positive feedback. It was a ton of avoiding failure, because if I had said, what's your research question? A ton of people would have just written their research question. Some people might have added some more information, but it's avoiding the failure by saying, okay, that's going to include the topic, the gap, whether you have access, the instrument. So I'm helping them avoid the failure, but I'm also amplifying their success. You're really using that same technique, because now they're sort of thinking like that expert in the field. Oh, this is the sorts of things I need to know. If I haven't thought about using an instrument, then I would fail. But now that I have an opportunity to succeed. So feed forward is really coming into this combination of these two things that you're going to help students on that formative basis, not go off the cliff. And it might hurt a little bit, but you're keeping them on the path, and you're also providing opportunities and really avenues for success. Because if they do that, you're not wasting time correcting them with your feedback, and they're not wasting time taking a ton of missteps where we have limited time for them to sort of get the competencies that we expect. So what are some ways that you can start thinking about incorporating feed forward that's going to help you make room for feedback? And this might take a little bit longer than quick chats, but a couple of things that you're starting to think about with that third strategy, incorporating feed forward to make room for feedback. So yeah, having the rubrics ahead of time and really have them do that before they even submit something. Where are they? What are the things that they could do to improve on that? I love that. Yeah, I mean, give them subheadings, have them use subheadings for sure. That's awesome. I mean, have everyone, Jack's saying, have everyone speak a common language. And I think that's like a good way to sort of encapsulate all those lessons from that slide and from what we're saying. If we have that common language and we're doing those common things, obviously you're going to be more efficient in the sorts of feedback you have, and the students are going to be more efficient in the assessments that they submit. Peer review for soft grading has to be one of my favorite strategies for this. I mean, it's not on here. I talk a little bit about it coming up, but the peer feedback, and I have students almost submit, I think, almost every assignment in a discussion forum. That's my main use for discussion forums presently. They submit their drafts and they give each other feedback. And I help them, I scaffold the feedback the same way that you saw in those instructions, so that they're thinking like the teacher. And then they're going back to their paper or their assignment and saying, oh, okay, these are the sorts of things that I just corrected on this other student. Let me make sure they're correct in my paper also. And for the student use rubric, I mean, I really love this concept of having an assignment, and this doesn't work in Elevate, it takes a little bit more time ahead of time, but helping students, showing students maybe an exemplar from a prior cohort or from the internet, and then having them create sort of a rubric based on what are the positive and negatives that they see, and then they can actually apply that. So actually having students almost even co-create a rubric for an assignment can be a really effective way. Excellent. Inclusive instructions, provide a quiz, sure. So that they understand when things are due. I mean, that consistency in due dates, I think, is just one of the most important things. If they know in module 1 that everything's due on Tuesday and Friday, and that's just true for the course, then you should really eliminate that problem. And I think that's why consistency is so important. Sample work, for sure. For sure, sample work is one of the best ways. And even in annotating an example of saying why you like it, because sometimes the sample alone isn't enough. We have to sort of express the ideas about it that we liked, and maybe even the things that we think could have been better. Exemplars don't have to be perfect. Yeah, so I think that, and for Bonnie, that comment about that evaluation of putting them in that soft peer review where the objective is really just, did you submit the work and did you provide feedback? And that's like a participation grade, really low stakes, really gets them thinking in that evaluative way. So great, glad. This is, I think, a super valuable concept, and glad we had a rich discussion about it. So that was the third strategy. So fourth starts to pull this all together. We're creating a comprehensive feedback strategy that's going to include feed forward that's making room for feedback. So this is a really cool thing that I like to do. I do it for the courses that I teach. Yes, that is my email, Carla. Thank you. And so I think about the ways that I am embedding feed forward into the course. That's mostly the gray that you're seeing. And then those more colorful things in the bottom are more of the feedback that I am giving. So really think about these two things. And I really think about, am I creating this illusion of presence, that I'm always there for students? So when we have super clear instructions that are using feed forward, let's take the quiz example, then the students are being carried by me through those instructions up into that quiz. And a lot of the times my quizzes are mini lessons that are self-graded, and that I encourage students to take until they get 100. So they get the concept. So it's the first thing, that's often the first gate of a module. And that's another way. The feedback's embedded in the quiz. It's an iterative process. We talked about the feedback loop. Someone wrote that earlier. So some of those mini lessons, formative quizzes, unlimited attempts until you get the 100, great way. You don't have to do anything. Obviously, a misuse of tools would be putting short answers in quizzes and having yourself grade them. That's going to obviously delimit your time. So feed forward in the instructions and teaching through the quiz. Let me just read this comment real quick. Awesome. So yeah, so using grade points for participation, are they doing it on time? So like, those are just logistical things. And I think that's the right way to approach those sorts of things. Like, are you doing these things? And give them that space to take some risks. So like, that's actually terrible advice. And then you have the opportunity maybe to correct that. And that comes into the forums, right? And again, so I'm helping students learn the concept through these mini lessons in the quizzes until they get 100. Then they come into the discussions and they start testing out their knowledge through a draft in most cases. Or an attempt at something, an attempt to synthesize the assignment. And again, those instructions, as you saw, super clear, ton of feed forward, keeping students from going off the rails. Then they're getting a ton of feedback from peers. So that's the point of it, right? They're reading peers, they're getting feedback from peers. I'd say one of the strategies that I think works with forums is making them reply, really actually making them only reply to one person. So they actually do a good job, but then really encouraging them to read my feedback to other students. And you'll see that below, where I'm going to do X discussion responses per day. So ton of feed forward. Again, in the instructions, ton of feed forward. But by this point, where they're getting to an assignment at the end of the module, they had the quiz, they've gotten a ton of feedback. They kept getting it wrong, then they did it until they got it right. They're getting that carrot, that instant carrot at the end of the stick. They're submitting, they're getting feedback from their peers. I'm posting some responses during the day for the forum, and then the instructions are feed forward. And so with a very little effort during the semester, I've given a ton of feed forward. And then I'm sure a lot of you are doing this, doing maybe some intro video that is just a little, hey, I read your post, this is what's happening, and then an outro video, kind of bookending. So I did some research on this, and maybe you found some different things. I've heard some people say different things. Students really do prefer overwhelmingly text feedback. But I think it should be actionable, and I think you should use some of the same feed forward strategies where you're being explicit about what you're trying to do with the feedback. Maybe finding a specific aspect of their paper that was, this was good, this was bad, and this is where you can improve. Some sort of rhythm that you can create. Because if you're grading that paper and it's like, so I'm teaching educational research, so I'm like 1 million APA errors. Like, how many times do I have to write that you did that thing wrong, right? And how valuable is it to read this 20th time for that student? So I think that you need to come up with a strategy there where if you are doing a ton of text, that you're actually making it a little bit easier. Yes, the same throughout. How many times have I typed the same throughout? Exactly. Look throughout. So, whatever strategy works for you, but definitely don't spend your time doing the same thing. I think you can be text heavy and then students don't find value. Feedback proper. you're going to have to limit yourself. You're going to have to pick an amount of time in the week, and you're going to say, I can spend 10 hours or whatever on this course. And then you're going to have to decide, what is that strategy? What's that form? What does the format of that feedback look like? And then hopefully you're covering for that, because we do have limited time, in the feed forward. Hopefully you're covering for that in the idea that you're giving discussion responses throughout the day, and those are public for everyone. I mean, individualized feedback is hugely valuable, but it's also highly personal. So when I give feedback on the forum, it's going to 50 students. When I give a ton of feedback to one student, it's going to one student, where those comments could apply to everyone. So I would definitely, as more often as you can, publicize the feedback that you're giving, and really actually spend a lot of time doing that with those annotated examples, with those forum posts, being really clear about that. And then again, coming up with a strategy. What are you going to focus on with that individual feedback? So that was a good discussion about all of that comprehensive strategy, which is going to be different for everyone based on how much time you have and what you're really trying to achieve. And finally, I would say this is where you get the most grace, is if you create a work plan for yourself, you give yourself grace, and where you communicate it clearly to your students. So this is the last strategy, is creating that illusion of presence with feed forward feedback, coming up with whatever your strategy is, and then communicating it. And again, I use the word grace because you have to be honest with yourself that you only have X amount of time, and you're going to have to come up with a strategy that works for you, especially in these large classes, and map out what you're actually going to do, like, and stick to it. Like if you're on there on the discussion forum for 15 minutes, you can probably do 5, 10 quick responses. Maybe you want to spend 20 minutes and give some longer ones, but that's up to you. But do that and communicate to the students that that's what you're going to do, and they'll at least they'll understand that that's what you're doing, and really be grateful that you're actually being proactive in the way that you're going to communicate with them and the way that you're going to give feedback. And even if it takes you longer, if you say 72 hours is too short, as long as you're communicating it, then you get that grace from the students. So that's the last step. Hopefully they're all super practical. Nothing I don't think really earth-shattering, but combined, they free up your time and they help students be successful. So we do have some time for some questions, but I do want to end here kind of encapsulating the content with this fake scenario. So a colleague asked you, what you learned today. So a few keywords in the chat of what are the most important points that you're taking away from our time together? Feed forward, awesome consistency. Yeah, feed forward is the greatest thing. I mean, the thing with feed forward is you're going to spend a ton of time, like the first time you do it, and then you're going to realize you have literally nothing to do during the semester. Like I always want to, like my goal is to get to a place where like the only thing I'm saying is like, hey, Terry, right? I'm so glad you're in my course again. That was a great paper. It sounds like you're really interested in this thing, because like they're doing everything right. Like they're like my feed forward is so good that there's annotated examples, and that they're getting they're giving each other feedback. The illusion of presence, that is one of my favorite concepts. It does happen. Like I feel bad sometimes because I put so much work before the semester, and the semester starts, and sometimes I feel like am I even doing anything? Like I'm getting overpaid once the semester starts, but I'm there in all of those ways that you saw. So it's that illusion that I'm constantly there. Like the students must think I'm constantly on Moodle, our LMS, but I'm really just on for 15 minutes a day. Yeah, Carla, it's so great. I love like the rando sentence that you pull that shows that you really read it. But I mean, if we're honest, we maybe, depending on your field, you can't read like word for word the whole thing. And that's where I think the headings come in. That's where the peer review comes in. And coming up with a strategy of like, usually at this point in the class, students benefit most with this sort of feedback, and then really looking for ways to do that. So like even maybe adding a little intention onto the rando sentence that we pull so they know we read it. But I think a lot of us do something like that. So I'm going to put in my email address one more time if you want the slides. I do actually love when people email me, just because then I'm connected with you at a different level. A lot of these ideas are found in this book that I wrote that came out in June by Routledge. Still overpriced. I guess they have to sell a certain amount of copies until they reduce the price. But I talk really quickly and it reads as quickly as, thank you, Robert. So nice. It's called Creating Transformative Online Communities in Higher Education. Robert, did you read it? You bought it as one thing. Like, I literally obviously make no money off this. They like, you have to pay for them to index this thing. Like, so I'm not going to do that. So they like well overpriced, definitely no money coming in. It's super short. It's like 130 pages. And again, it reads super quick. But I appreciate the support very much, Robert. Yes, creating transformative online. One other thing is a lot of these ideas I've boiled down with a partner into an online discussion platform. Paula has used it. Paula, we're coming out with a brand new version coming out in the spring. Oh, it's on sale at Rutledge. Thank you, David. And if you want to get on the early list for our new app, just scan this QR code and you just fill out a quick form. I definitely, Shane, I appreciate that. And I definitely want to create the audiobook, which would probably read faster than you would read it yourself, which would be good. Maybe it would take like 45 minutes to read the whole thing with me just blathering on as quickly as I do. So we do have some time. Love to hear some more for you from the audience. You all have been amazingly interactive, and I've appreciated our time together. Other strategies that you use, other questions that you have remaining, something that I missed that you thought was important that didn't get attention during our time. So, I mean, we can talk about that, right? So I think that depends. And I think if we find ourselves giving canned feedback text, I think that is room for feed forward, probably because we are saying similar things to a lot of people. And so I always say, like, the heuristic for me is, should I say this to 100 different people individually, or should I say it to 100 people at once? And if I'm giving that canned feedback a bunch of times, that for me is my signal to be like, oh, okay, I'm not doing something, or there's an opportunity to do something before that, so that I'm not providing that feedback. Again, I think in some ideal world, we're like barely have anything left to say to a student. I don't think we'll ever get there, but that's sort of like where I try to think about going with this. Is like, I should have nothing to say because they all get it. They all have opportunity to learn a million times. They all have opportunity to get feedback from each other. And almost, even better, like they're doing it right the first time, even though I totally believe in formative and learning as we go. Excellent. So yeah, so I would say that's a great way to do it. A strategy, obviously, that I'm sure you use and a lot of people would use would keep that Excel sheet or just a spreadsheet and make sure you're hitting everyone. I try to hit everyone once when I'm doing the name up in lights sort of scenario, so that I'm not favoriting the same person 5 times. And again, with that annotation, I want to really be specific about what are the things that I saw that highlighted. And it doesn't have to be the best, right? I'll often pick something that isn't the best in a lot of ways, but it's maybe doing one area really well. And I'll highlight that because that's so encouraging for a student to know that theirs was picked because it did something really well. And so it accomplishes both of those things where you're encouraging that student and broadcasting feedback at a high level. And it really personalizes that experience. So yep, totally love it. Excellent. So on a scale of we should stick around to we're ready to leave, sounds like no one else has anything to say. Thank you. Thank you. Hope to get some emails. Hopefully some of you scan this and get on the code. We're not spamming people. It's just we'll email you. It's free to start using.
Just want to say thank you, Patrick, again for your presentation. It was very, very informative. I guess we all got a lot of information on how to do the feed forward. And I just want to remind everybody that once you leave the session, you'll get a link to a survey. So if you can please complete it, it will really help us out to get your feedback. All right. So again, Patrick, thank you for the presentation, and see you all in the next session. Starts at 3 p.m. Eastern.
Thank you all so much. Really genuinely appreciate all your interaction and support. Thank you so much. Rochelle, you can email me.